So our first presenter is Dr. Sophia Sarigianides from the English department, and I think her presentation fits perfectly into what we have been dealing with the last couple of days and weeks. I'm just going to read a little bit from the nomination form about her teaching. Her teaching demonstration links theory and practice in multiple ways. Built into the content of the lesson is a complex theoretical framework for understanding racism. The thematic interpretations shaped by this theoretical framework disrupts not only facile treatments of literature, it creates opportunities for teacher candidates to consider how to bring theoretical rigor as well as social justice understandings to middle and high school English classrooms. Embedded in the framework is evidence of the oppressive effects of whiteness on immigrants, especially those who are also people of color. Given the dominance of white teachers in the US teaching force, 84%, opportunities to understand our role in perpetuating racism by seeing the effects of whiteness on people of color works to create more commitment to and create practices to use in anti-racist teaching in the field.
So the presentation is called Racial Melancholia in American-Born Chinese, which is an award-winning graphic novel that I use in my English education classes to prepare middle school and high school English teachers. And I do see it as really appropriate at the moment that we're doing this. So when I ask students, and I will tell you a little bit about the book. So this is a book that focuses, it has 3 stories. It's going to be, my presentation is going to spoil the book. And it's a great book to spoil, unfortunately. It's got 3 stories. It's got the story of the Chinese Monkey King. It's got the story of Asian Jin, American-born Asian Jin going through school. And it has the story of white high school Danny going through school. And the author runs these 3 stories until they fuse together in a fantastic, amazing way. And when I ask students, what is this story about? What is the theme? They usually give me responses like this. It's about identity. It's about just accept who you are, and that's how you'll be happy. And the explanation they give is that all of the main character's struggles, who's an American-born Chinese boy, go away once he's shaken off his white identity at the end. And I see this as a highly problematic theme for this novel and for other multicultural novels that are taught in schools, especially by American-born white teachers, which is the majority of the teaching force. And I don't know why my presentation is exceeding the bounds. It didn't when I did this in a national audience, but sorry. So here are some of the problems with typical identity themes in this novel and other novels like it. It individualizes the problem. It puts the burden of adjusting on the victim, right? Or on the victim of racism. It ignores that this young boy was very happy with his Chinese identity until he moved into a white-dominant neighborhood and school, and whiteness is never mentioned in the book at all, even though it's the dominant force, coercive force in the novel. And this explanation of the other versions of theme miss the structural coerced effects of white American racism on Asians in the US. So I want to show you how I show this to my students who are junior level students and grad students who also take the class. So this concept of racial melancholia, I am doing an application of it. It is not my theory. It's based on Freud's distinctions between mourning and melancholia, which I'll tell you about. And then 2 Asian American theorists, one literary theorist and one clinical psychologist, extend Freud's concept of melancholia beyond an individual problem to one that is socially or culturally coerced onto members of minoritized groups. So I'm calling this racial melancholia because that's what's going on in this novel, but it could be the concept of ethnic melancholia, it could be called, or gendered melancholia, applies to other minoritized groups like women, post-colonials, members of the queer community, and certainly people of color as well. All right, so this is Freud now. So Freud is trying to understand the effects of a deep loss, right? The loss of a deep love object. And in mourning, the suffering is finite, right? I lost my father, I mourned and grieved him deeply for a period of time, and then I got over it, right? You still feel the loss, but you move past it. That's mourning, it's finite. It involves a public grieving of the loss because it's a recognized loss, people know, and I do it in public, people know. And I'm Greek, so I wore black when I lost my dad, which is true. And it's considered normal. to suffer mourning when you lose something that deep, right? And it is conceptualized as individual suffering. I'm suffering when I go through mourning. In Freud's understanding, melancholia is a suffering that is infinite. There is no end to it. It's depression, right? And the loss is ungrievable. For one reason or another, the loss cannot be grieved or is not being grieved. And so that object, identification with that object is internalized, right? I can't let it go, so I take it in. And the book does this literally, which is amazing because it's in graphic form. And this melancholia is considered pathological. It's a problem. And it's a problem that is conceptualized on an individual level in Freud. So Eng and Han take Freud's concept of melancholia and they extend it into this concept of racial melancholia. And now they're trying to explain that they're noticing, well, what happened was they noticed that a lot of Asian Americans were suffering melancholia. And it was it was very, very similar, and they started getting together to theorize examples of this loss in literature and examples in real people. And what they talk about, this theory exposes how losses of cultural, racial, gendered, or sexual identity are socially coerced by dominant society onto individuals and groups. It is experienced because of group membership to a minoritized identity. So rather than being seen as an individual problem, it is a societal problem that causes it, as we know on campus at the moment. And their theory actually considers the social value of the lost object, which is beautiful. The loss is ungrievable because the object that was lost is socially reviled. And the example they give is in the 80s during the AIDS crisis. If I lost a partner in the AIDS crisis, they died because of it, my loss is not appropriate, right? Because why would I mourn this loss? This is a socially reviled union, and at the time, members of the gay community were being blamed for AIDS, right? And so this is one example that they offer. And in their theory, they actually ascribe a dignity to the melancholic's refusal to mourn. Rather than see it as a pathological problem, they think of it as dignified, which is quite beautiful in a poignant way. So now I'm going to apologize in advance. Yesterday, when we were crouching in the middle of our offices, I was going to clean up these images, and it didn't happen. So I want to show you some images from the novel, and I will describe, you don't have to be able to read what it says, I'm just going to describe what you're seeing. So this narrative follows just one of the three storylines. And this is Jin when he's living in Chinatown, in San Francisco's Chinatown, right? And what we talk about with students is, in these images, early in the novel, before he moves to the white suburbs, he's fine with his Asian identity. They are speaking in Mandarin. All the Asian boys look different. They're not homogenized physically. They are immersed in play, watching Transformers on the TV and then replicating the games and spitting and being lost in play the way my two boys down the hall are playing right now. So before cultural othering, Jin is fine with his identity, right? Which already refuses the possibility of those easy themes I identified early. Those things don't work if he's already fine with who he is, right? Okay, now the losses begin, and the losses just accumulate. So I'm just going to show you examples of a series of losses that Jin starts to experience the minute he sets foot into a white school, a white dominant school. So this is Timmy, who is depicted in wearing dog tags, so he's identified as part of the military, right? And he says, this is his first day into class, and he says, my mama says Chinese people eat dogs. And the white teacher, whom you're waiting for to rectify the problem, says, now be nice to me. I'm sure Jin doesn't do that. In fact, Jin's family probably stopped that sort of thing as soon as they came to the United States. So what she's missing is he's American born, he's from San Francisco, right? She doesn't know anything about what Chinese people eat. And she's allowing this derogation of a cultural identity to happen in a public school space that is supposed to sanction knowledge, right? This is the first day in this school. And as these accumulate, I want to show you other possible responses to these melancholic losses. So one step is that there's a turning away from the social and melancholia, and if you've ever suffered a loss that's really deep, you know, I didn't want to leave my house for a while after my dad died. So, or I had a really bad breakup. You turn away from the social. So on the top panel, on the leftmost set of frames, there's all these white children playing at recess. Jin is eating by himself, and he's eating an American sandwich in this image because he was just told that his dumplings must have dog in them. No mention the fact that he starts eating American food, starts assimilating. It's just shown, so you've got to look carefully when you're looking at the novel. And then at the bottom, here comes Timmy again with the dog tags, and he says, what is that? And he says, dumplings. And he says, well, stay away from my dog, right? And then this guy, this blonde guy with the curly hair, says, stay cool, man, right? So he stands up to the bully, and he kind of steps back. So this white, blonde-haired, curly-haired boy takes on some power for Jin in his mind. And he's starting to think, well, maybe that's what it takes to be happier in school, right? So one step of melancholia is a turning away from the social. Another step is assimilation. And you watch this series of ideas in Jin's mind as he's suffering a series of losses which could be called racial microaggressions. And he thinks, maybe if I change my hair and make it more white, right? So not typically straight Asian hair, but curly hair. So he perms his hair. And his Asian friends want to mock him for it because they say it looks like broccoli, but they don't because they understand why he's doing it. They know why he's trying to ease his suffering. Another response to cultural loss is a rejection of one's own culture. So here comes, so Jin has been isolated at school. You see that he's eating by himself on the back bench. This little boy is a new student in the school, Wei Shen from Taiwan. And he comes and approaches him and starts speaking to him in Mandarin. And Jin says, speak English, you're in America now. So he's giving him back exactly what he's been hearing to himself. And while Wei Shen is trying to be friends with him, he says, I've already got friends. And he points to, and he says, where? Wei Shen says, where are your friends? And he says, those people who are way far away and don't have anything to do with him. So even though he could get some commiseration from other Asians who might be experiencing similar losses, he rejects that because that is a connection to the reviled subject that is being culturally othered. And we see that again here. So it's a rejection of his own culture, won't speak Mandarin, and also Susie Nakamura, whose name tells us she's of Japanese descent, is someone that he avoids as well because the kids at school decided that their marriage has already been arranged, even though they don't know each other, and so they avoid each other as well. So these are similar responses to cultural othering in the novel. Another response to cultural othering, and you can see the layering. This is not just one instance, it's over and over and over again, and they're all on school sites, so it's perfect for someone who prepares teachers to use this book. Here's Greg now, a white Greg, who has approached Jin, who just had a date with a white girl, and he says to Jin, I want to ask you a favor. Can you just not go out with her anymore? We're about to go to high school, and she needs to make good choices about who she hangs out with. And Jin thought the date went really well, despite deodorant problems, and he says okay to him, even though it's a terrible request. And he also, Greg makes it seem like it's no big deal, and he says, thanks for doing me a favor, buddy, and it's a big smile, like a pat on the back. And what you see in Jin's mind, all of these are thought bubbles, is his rage just grows and grows and grows. But as it grows and grows and grows, the last panel is him not saying anything. So this unavowed rage just mounts. Right? And so he turns this unavowed rage toward his own culture. In the first panel, Susie, they're friends now. So Wei Shen and Susie and Jin are all friends now. And in the first panel, Susie has just told Jin that she has been called a chink by the white boys at school, a derogatory term for Asians. And she says, deep down inside, that's how I really feel. So she's internalized the opinion of the white dominant group. And when she hears it, that rings true. It's beginning to ring true. And rather than Jin see this as a moment of possible connection, he kisses her, which makes no sense in terms of the plot. He's not interested in her, he's actually interested in white girls, and she's his best friend's girlfriend. So there's no, if you don't think about why he's kissed Susie, it just kind of goes right by, but it's totally explained by this theory of racial melancholia. He's connected to what she just said because he's experiencing the same things himself. So then she punches him in the face for kissing her, and then he goes home and his best friend Wei Shen comes and says, "Why did you do that? Why would you kiss her? Were you interested in her?" And he starts telling him, "Maybe you're not good enough. Maybe you don't deserve her." Everything that Greg told him. So he's just spouting it right back out. Everything that he's been getting in terms of the racism for being Asian. So then Wei Shen punches him in the face. And so this is the last straw. And that night, as Asian Jin, at the beginning of the panel, sits in bed and worries about what's happened to him. He's lost his two closest friends. He's not allowed to date the white girl he was very interested in because a white boy said to stay away from her. He's trying to figure out a solution for his problems, and he's telling himself, "I did the right thing." Wei Shen needed to hear that. So he's completely internalized the discourse. And he realizes that his answer is easy in his mind. He can just turn white. And it's at this moment, and he looks at himself in the mirror and he's shocked that he's white in the mirror, and then he's smiling that he's white in the mirror. And only in this moment do you realize the third narrative of white high school Danny is Jin, who's being depicted as white because in his mind, he's taking on whiteness by playing basketball, not speaking Mandarin, eating white American food, etc. So, problem solved. Racism, all the internalized racism is solved, except that the theory explains that even if you take up the option of what Frantz Fanon says, turn white or you disappear. So he turns white so as not to disappear as an Asian kid in American schools who's forever seen as foreign. Even if you take that option, your problems aren't over because you are forever worrying the melancholic return of being seen through Asian stereotypes. So one of the characters that shows up in white Danny's narratives only is this composite of Asian caricatures in the US, Chinky. His name is Chinky. And you can see from his clothing and his coloring and the way that he behaves throughout the series, he's not only a composite of historic American racism toward Asians, he's also a composite of, right now to this day, American racism toward Asians. So that in one scene, he's in the library and he's with wild abandon, he's dancing to Ricky Martin's She Bang, which is the American Idol audition song for William Huang, who's this engineering student who auditions for American Idol and gets ridiculed and becomes famous later, by the way, as a result of it. But he is, so when we say that even if you become white in your mind, right, you worry the melancholic return of being seen through Asian stereotypes, that means that even though Jin is doing everything he's supposed to become white, American white, the melancholic return is going to show up in, when people see me, do they see me as Chinky? Because that's what I'm always worried about. So it never goes away. Turning white is not a solution nor an option if you're fit for people of color, right? This is an example of how these problems are not just in the past. I show students these videos that are from 1 year ago, right around the election. The first one, you might remember Jesse Waters it had a show on Fox News through the O'Reilly show, where he went to New York's Chinatown and interviewed people to talk about the election, and he made sure to interview people who didn't speak English and were just smiling and nodding, so it completely reinforced racist stereotypes. That was 1 year ago. And Michael Luo is the Metro deputy editor for the New York Times. And this is the same week, I think. Yeah, October 10th, 2016. So a week later, he publishes a letter on the front page it gets on the front page of the New York Times about how he's Asian American and he was walking out of church with his family, and some white lady got mad that they were taking up too much of the sidewalk, and she yells at him, I see children, "Go back to your flipping country," out loud. And so he writes an open letter, and it goes in the front of the New York Times, and I'm not going to show the videos, but there's also, immediately they got floods of responses from Asians from a variety of backgrounds saying, me too, basically. And they videotaped what people say about them, and to the hashtag, this is 2016, like how can this still be happening? And what I want to say is that when I've taught I'm not done yet, but I want to say that when I've taught this novel in environments where there are Asian students, I haven't taught a single Asian student yet at Westfield State, but when I taught in New York City and I had Asian students, they would come to my office hours after reading the novel and say, I don't know what has happened to me in this novel, but I can't stop weeping. And I didn't have that response in reading the novel. I love this novel. I think it's actually a perfect piece of literature. But there's something about that experience that I can't identify with, that my Asian students did identify with when they talked about it. So the result is ineffable suffering for Asians in the US, regardless of what they do. It's very interesting that in the videos that are a response to the New York Times article, everybody is given their job title, so they give a maybe first and last name and their job title, and I ask students, why are we getting the fact that these are all very established, successful professionals? It's because you can climb up all the social ladder steps you want. It doesn't matter. You're not allowed to be American. You're seen as forever foreign. So thankfully, the novel does offer solutions to mourning. Like, how do you mourn these losses? And this is coming, I'm applying the theory to see this in the novel. And so one way that the novel suggests you do it is that you direct that unavowed rage toward the stereotypes directly. So the way another reveal happens in the novel is that White Danny, who is actually Asian Jin, but we don't know it yet, just punches Chinky in the face when he says one too many times, I'm not going away. I'm staying with you forever. I love America. So this composite of racist stereotypes is American born. We created it, we perpetuate it. And so only when he punches it in the face does he behead it, and then you get a reveal as to who Chinky really is. And another solution, and this is interestingly only in the older publications of this novel, like my students don't have this in the back of their novel, but I do, and I have an interpretation of it. This is an image of what had circulated, especially in the 90s, of a boy band YouTube clip where boys would kind of imitate a boy band, right? But what's interesting here is these are the boys that were estranged. So this is Jin and this is Wei Shen. And now they're wearing a Houston Rockets jersey because that's the team that Yao Ming played for, right? So a very famous Chinese basketball player who's now beloved by the US, right? Because he's a basketball star, super masculine, right? But they're singing to Wild Abandon and not looking to see if I'm doing it right or fitting in. So they're friends, they're identifying with their culture, and they are subversively repeating the white boy band because they're Asian boys, and they're doing it while wearing the jerseys of this Houston Rockets Asian basketball player. And so what I want to say is, to close, is that another opportunity for mourning, and not just, for the students who suffer it, certainly, is reading books like this and having very, very complicated explanations of racism to accompany them. That's the problem, is explanations of how racism works and how whiteness perpetuates racism is not simple. And that's why we can't sell it so easily either. But it is experiences like this, having a public language, understanding that this thing called racial melancholia is a thing, and that you can see it in other bodies of literature, and I know that my students have written about it in my colleagues' classrooms because they've seen it in other pieces of literature, gives students a way to understand the way that racism functions that is complicated, that implicates them if they look at a student in their class in the future and think, why can't you just assimilate? Why can't you just get with the program? To understand that expectation is performing a violence on minoritized students. Thank you.
We have time for a question or two if you would like to ask Sophia something.
Vanessa?
Do you know if any of your English ed students have gone on to use that book in local middle schools or high schools?
So Sarah Lavati, which just graduated a year and a half ago, got a grant and ordered a class set of American-born Chinese, and so she's teaching it at Holyoke High. And they need it right now because of all the issues they're having with Puerto Rican identity on campus, right? That has exceeded to the community. And so yes, that's the one that I know is happening. And then a former graduate student is teaching at Amherst High, and she asked me for all of my PowerPoints, and she's about to teach it later this semester as well. So it's starting. The truth is, it's difficult. I've presented on it. I have a published article, and I brought copies. and I have to practice again because I'm not a psychoanalytic theorist. I'm not a Freudian. This is not my wheelhouse at all, except that the novel called for it. Like, it deserves that kind of complicated analysis, and so I had to kind of ratchet it up theoretically to get it. So I understand why it's not easy to transfer, and it's super amazing that some students are willing to take it on in whatever way they manage to get it conveyed. Christine?
Let's see if I can make myself heard. So I'm curious about how you are actually teaching that. So I'm assuming the students are reading the book, and then are they able to make a lot of the connections that you were pointing out, or how much do you have to help them? How does that work?
I have to help them a lot with this. So what we do is we read the book as a graphic novel. I let them come up with those themes that you saw at the beginning, and I just I just bite my tongue for a while. It's really hard for me because they'll tell me, I want to design a unit. This is all about identity. It's all about, Jin just needs to accept himself. I'm like, yep, I know. Yes, that's exactly right. And then I wait till the following week and I make them read, I used to make them read the original theory, and now I make them read my article because it explains this novel. Like, the original theory explains the theory. My article explains this novel through the theory, and doesn't explain everything. There's still space for them to make interpretive moves. And I do this with them, this whole presentation. We sit down and we talk about questions. They try to find other applications in other settings. And interestingly, of all the stuff that I do, and I do other things with race, this is the article that they write to me about the most a year later to write papers for Carol Bailey's class and Vanessa Deanna's class, other people who talk about texts that focus on racial melancholia. Carol?
So, mine's just a comment, Sophia. Just to say thank you for doing this work. By the time the students get to my class, they get it. And so racial melancholia is actually a point of entry for many of my students in post-colonial literature, in Black American literature, in African and diasporic literature. They come and they help me to make sense of it in that way and bring something that's very relevant to these other critical models, but also that brings their own understanding. So I'm grateful that there is this other place that they can go, and that we're actually having a cross curriculum, across departmental conversation.
Thank you. When Ibtisam Barakat came a few weeks ago, the Palestinian author, we read her novel as well, and it's about a loss of homeland, and that is a love object, right? And I saw racial melancholia all over it, and I asked her. She's like, send me your article. Send me your article, let me see. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I have copies of the article if you're interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.